Thanks for joining us today for Look Before You Speak. And we have a very special guest with us today. And Tom Bensen with Arts Missoula. But he's wears so many different hats in the community. He's been involved in planning and executing a lot of festivals and been involved as a choral member and has so many hats on related to the arts. And it serves on the board of Spark, and but today this feels so fun because Tom's going to talk about some of his passions in the arts, and he's brought some images that we can look at and gain an insight into his appreciation and his some of his language and understanding of the arts. Thanks for coming in today,
Thank you.
Tom.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
You know, the Look Before You Speak, the concept of the program relates to this idea that commercial television has imagery up for between 1 and 2 seconds, which is a long time. And that doesn't really do justice to the visual arts or the arts generally. And we want to encourage people to really take some time, and we want to have the images up for a while on the screen and visit with these dynamic people who talk about art and take our time and not get bogged down, but have a real appreciation for the arts. And so, anyway, Tom, you brought some images today.
Yeah, I did. And I thought I would speak today not so much about what I do 9 to 5, but what really inspired me from the beginning in terms of visual arts.
That's fantastic.
And you mentioned I'm a choral singer. I've been involved in music just about all my life. And I always appreciated the visual arts, but I never felt confident in being one myself. And so I kind of muddled my way through art classes in school, but really found that I appreciated looking at art. I loved looking at art, and I was drawn to art history classes when I was in college. But before that, when I was about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years old, my older brother was also in college. He had taken some art history, and he was showing me some of what he was studying, and that was really the first time I took a look at pictures in big art books and started to appreciate art, not only from the art but also from the history part of it too, because I was a history major and I studied history, and so this was sort of another way of studying history, was studying it through art.
You know, there's so many overlapping concepts and disciplines, for example, history, and I would dare say even science,
right,
and the arts, poetry, dance, music,
right.
And at the core and basis is this problem solving and the way in which humans address a problem in which they brainstorm or it comes to fruition. But even with that, you know, an individual that's executing or working in a creative way, they need an audience, and they need a person that has the empathy to appreciate and absorb that.
Yeah.
And that's what's so exciting about what you're talking about. So anyway, should we flash up one of your images?
Sure, yeah. You bet.
Oh, wow.
So this was the first painting that I saw in a book, as I said, when I was about 10 or 12 years old, that I just thought, well, this is really fascinating. This is, and I didn't realize at the time, you know, how famous it was. I just thought it was, more than anything else, the intricate detail that goes into this was remarkable. And then I found out that it's only about a 2 feet by 3 feet. I mean, it's pretty small painting. It's by Jan van Eyck from I guess the early 1400s. And then this showed up in one of my first art history survey courses of Western art in the Renaissance, and this one shows up, the Arnolfini wedding. And I realized later that it's full of all sorts of imagery that I didn't realize at the time. Everything in there it references something, and usually religious. For instance, the sandals on the side are supposed to represent that they're in a holy place. They're taking their shoes off. The dog, I found out later, represents fidelity, and that's where the word when I was preparing for this, I looking around. That's where the word Fido comes from.
Oh, that's
so
great.
that's just sort of a little
I've
aside.
never heard that.
Anyway, I was drawn by the fact that you can see that the window is open and there's probably buildings behind the window, but it's such a narrow angle. It's like, how did he do that? Mm-hmm. And then the most intricate part is the mirror behind.
And you have a close-up of that.
Yeah, I think the next slide has
Okay.
the actual mirror behind is, it's only about 6 inches square, if you figure. And there it is. It's sort of, it's
The reflection.
The reflection, and it's sort of I guess, convex, so it sort of spreads out. You actually can see more of the window than you can in the actual painting. And you can see the two people getting married, and you can see the people behind them in the doorway.
Yeah.
And you can see on the outside of the mirror, there's smaller images, which I think, again, are religious. I think they're the Stations of the Cross or something like that. But I just figured, how did he find a brush that could do all this?
Yeah.
That's what, and then sort of a little bit of humor. Up at the top, he signs his name, Jan van Eyck was here.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Well, and I think, at this time, the Dutch were really pushing the limits of looking at and studying and capturing light from a particular time.
Yeah.
And it really comes through in his paintings, and this one in particular.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about it being a narrow composition, I mean, there's all these, I'm not going to say tricks, but, there's compositional colors that are just, the red and green just hit you.
Right.
And,
Absolutely, the contrast there. Yeah.
Then you see the light raking across both of the figures, and the reflection, and the back wall, and they were masters.
They were masters. They were masters. As much as anything else, I was impressed at that age by the creativity of this, of the vision of this, and then putting it down on canvas was something I just found remarkable. And particularly since I had such a hard time drawing myself. How do people do this? How do they come up with this?
And structurally, this piece is the perspective it's 2-point perspective, and it's fantastic. I mean, the way it's structured. So.
Yeah. No. And it struck me as a 10-year-old, and it still strikes me today. So that's really the first work of art that I can think of that really struck me as I'd like to learn more. I'd like to learn more about this, and I'd like to study more because I just find it fascinating.
Well, and even though this is centuries old, there's a freshness about it.
Yeah.
And being able to visit, and there's a relationship between that art and art that you see in museums today.
Right.
The study of light.
Right.
The challenge of a fresh interpretation of what this is. And at the time, these were pretty fresh and new ideas that they were exploring. So, so you have another piece. You have another piece that's from some of the same era. Many people will recognize this, Michelangelo, the Pietà, from the same century, actually, later on, I think. And this strikes me, and has always struck me for some of the same reasons that the Van Eyck did, is how did he visualize this? Where did this creativity come from? I mean, this started off as a block
of stone, marble. And I always think, well, what happens if you make a mistake? You know, you got to go get another one. I mean, but it moves me in a different way. Not only the detail, things like the fold of the clothes that Mary is wearing, but more than that, it's the sense of pathos and emotion that just it just hits you in the gut. Not simply because obviously this is a very powerful religious and holds deep spiritual significance for so many people, but on a basic human level, it's a mother and child, and the mother is holding her dead son, and that as I said, that hits you in the gut as much as anything.
Yeah.
You know? And you have to kind of overlook some of the. I guess suspend a little bit of disbelief in that they're roughly the same age.
Yeah.
and she is, she's almost framed as if she is like I want to say a barca lounger, you know, but it's so she's sort of his seat, his sofa, as well
Cradle,
as
right.
it's his cradle.
Yeah.
But besides that, it's just looking at her face and the resignation and the sorrow and the sadness. I'm always amazed that someone could see that in a block of marble.
Right. Well, and I think some of the remarkable things in looking at Michelangelo, just how gifted he was.
Oh, yeah.
And a real genius. And you know, you see this piece, and compositionally, it's just perfect. And also to make marble perform like flesh.
Yeah.
And and the other thing about it, the message that people I think underestimate is, you know, there was no television,
Right.
and so people were deeply moved by these sculptures, and this was a way in which, you know, and much of the congregation was not literate.
Right.
So this was a way of teaching, communicating, and this was as powerful as the medium of television at the time.
Absolutely.
So you think of his way of expressing himself and the artists of the age, and there were a lot of them around that were masters. Yeah. And but you know, he was as gifted as a painter as a sculptor.
Yeah.
And you know, this is a remarkable piece.
But you're right. You know, I was just thinking that you know, comparing it to today with television, that people could learn, and they could. This is that you could just stare at this piece for so long in a very sort of contemplative, meditative way, so that it provided that kind of health for people.
Yeah. And hope.
And hope, absolutely.
So, you know, I think, you know, in many ways it's really dark, but, you know, the church, you know, was an educator.
Absolutely.
And so they had all of these narratives floating around you. And
they were a great supporter of the arts.
yes, yeah, yeah. I'm not going to go there.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, that could be, there's lots you can go with that one, but believe it at that, yeah.
Let's look at another image. I just love it, the fact.
So anyway, this is,
wow.
we're going all the way back to the beginning. This is when and I don't know if this is the case anymore, but when I was taking art history, when you took a survey of Western art, this was probably the first slide you looked at. I think it's Lascaux in France. And I think now they've discovered cave paintings that are even older than this. But to me, it speaks to the power that, well, we really don't know why they at least I don't know, and maybe you know more than I do, but why these paintings even existed in these caves and what they were used for. And we can come up with all sorts of theories, but to me, I just see that there's a reverence of nature, and it's a fear of nature. This animal could kill, but it was also food. So there was a certain, obviously a respect for it and a reverence of it, which I think for those of us in Montana, we revere nature also. We respect nature. Nature's a part of our lives in Montana. So you see a lot of reverence for nature in contemporary local and regional art.
Sure.
So I like to compare this to what we see.
Stuff
in
that's
Montana.
being produced today, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of speculation and thinking about where these came from and what they meant. And a lot of historians refer to them as animism, either make part of a record, but also part of a spiritual survival, and the fact that the people who were doing these were special in the community.
Yeah.
So the artists themselves were,
celebrities.
And Duchamp referred to them as the shaman artists. And so they might have been considered as, because they could recreate these, like they may have had some kind of special power. And so historically, the attitudes towards artists change through time and are different at different ages. I'm sure the Dutch were elevated, and certainly Michelangelo was thought of in a more elevated way. But I think that was true back at the beginning too, as the artists were elevated and thought of and are respected. They had something special, and that was in music and dance and theater and. There's no surviving poetry from 3 BC, but I'm sure there were poets.
Yeah. I'm sure there were.
Yeah. So let's look at another. That's fantastic. I love the fact you brought that in.
So anyway, speaking of reverence of nature, I like to I've spoken to audiences, and I've usually shown these two slides together: the caves at Lascaux, followed by Kendall Jan Jubb, and the brook trout or the rainbow trout, I guess. And there's another reverence for nature, and it's a very contemporary. We don't have to go to Lascaux to see the reverence of nature. We can go walk right down the street to some of our galleries and find this. So
sure, and that's she's such a professional, and the execution of this. I think people. I hope people understand how wonderful these are, and she is a watercolor. He uses watercolor.
Uses watercolor,
and I think the dark areas are probably ink, but it's a water media, and. How does someone come out of the womb and evolve to become such a gifted painter? I mean, or a gifted singer, or a gifted
where does that
performer?
Come from?
Where does it come from?
Yeah.
And in society, these kinds of people are in the minority, and we need to celebrate them and treasure them.
Absolutely.
And she has this really great vision.
Yeah.
It's not something you see all the time.
And I find the use of color seems, when you look at it, firsthand, you say, well, that's nice, it's very vibrant, but is it slightly exaggerated? And I used to think that way when I saw some of Monty Dolak's paintings too, and his water paintings, and I thought, well, is that exaggerated? And then one time I was standing by the Rattlesnake Creek looking at the rocks in the river. I said, no, that's not exaggerated. They really are blue and red and all these wonderful colors.
And the other thing that's occurs in this painting is that is old, is there it is again. The use of complementary colors to
Yeah.
bounce your eye around
Right.
as a
Right.
compositional element. It's like there's the red and green.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there is the control and the study of light.
Yeah.
And these are old ideas that are passed down
Right.
and along. And that experience of doing these things over and over again becomes cemented in this practice. Yeah, this is really wonderful.
So I wanted to bring, sort of shift gears here from the from my old art history textbooks to more contemporary art. So.
Well, I'm glad you did. And, you know, the thing about it is art is organic, and it's living, breathing, and it doesn't, you can appreciate something that's old and maybe abstract in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the cave paintings at Lascaux, they're not inferior, they're just different.
They're just different, yeah.
And I think sometimes that's the mistake in looking at art, is thinking that one particular art form is superior to another.
Right.
And instead of thinking of as, you know, a hierarchical, you know, appreciation in the arts, that, you know, realism is superior to impressionism or something like that, that think about artists as problem solvers. Is the artist successful at solving the problem that's before
Oh,
them?
that's great.
And
Yeah.
I think that that's a better way
Right.
that we can look at art and achieve an appreciation of it. We don't have to necessarily like it.
Right. No, you're right.
And but we can be thinking, boy, this artist is challenging themselves in a way. You know, they have a triangular piece of marble, and they're creating these drawings
Right.
of what is going to occur and happen. And were they successful?
Right.
And
Well, and they challenge themselves and they challenge us. That's what the artist does. Is it challenges the audience to often think of things in a different way.
And you have, you travel and visit museums,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously have an appreciation. When you go to communities, you go to these museums
right,
and
absolutely.
see a lot of different, yeah,
I do.
historic stuff as well as,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I love going to new, whether it's a big city or a small town, seeing what museum is available and what they have to offer. Absolutely.
And I think it's that's the other thing I hope people gain from this program, is that, you know, art is in our community. It's here and it's now, and people are practicing, and they might be your neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
They might be in your family. You might have a sibling who's an artist.
Right.
And you know, don't think of a hierarchy like, gee, that's good work that's in New York or Los Angeles, but that artwork, there's a level of appreciation that is here and now, and that we need to celebrate and appreciate those musicians and singers, dancers, visual artists that are here, that live with us.
Right.
And that's part of the elevation of the community that Duchamp referred to as those special people in our
Right.
community that are helping us with our language and drawing us closer together.
Yeah. Well, I think that art, this is complementary to what you're saying. It delights us. It inspires us. It can unite us.
Yeah.
It can also be very challenging, and some people can be offended.
Yeah.
But all in all, it is it makes us more creative. It makes us more productive. It makes us more interesting.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And you have one more image here? Maybe a couple?
I do. One more. And this is
Oh my goodness!
this is a museum. You mentioned going to museums in various communities. I was just traveling on the East Coast visiting my family, and my brother lives in Western Massachusetts, and this is the Massachusetts Museum of Contemporary Art, called MoCA, and it is located in an old abandoned textile factory, of which there are many in the Northeast that haven't been used for a long time, and they're huge. This one is huge in Western Massachusetts, and it was the community bought it up and it has turned it into an indoor arts installation special place. And this is an exhibit that is happening right now. It's by the artist Nick Cave, and it's called Until. And I was just amazed by but first of all, the massiveness of how he used the space, but also just the intricate detail of all these hanging mobiles. He definitely has a message inserted in there. There are guns, and there's images of violence, and so he's making a strong statement about violence and racism in our society. I didn't get that initially when I saw it. I just said, wow, this is an incredibly creative use of space. I was just amazed by and you could just spend hours watching all these little mobiles turn around and how the light reflects off of them, and some of them sort of give the impression they're constructed in a way that there's kind of an optical illusion thing going on.
Wow,
yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, the textile factories, additionally like an adaptive reuse, and
Right.
they've been really creative in inviting these residencies at the museum, and of course he is quite a creative artist.
He is.
Yeah, he's been all over the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's never bogged down. You might think it's over the top, but it's a complete experience.
Yeah.
You immerse yourself in
You do.
this.
You do.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Well, I think we're going to wrap
Okay.
up here, and I sure appreciate you coming
Well,
on today. And I want to thank you for all the work you do in the community.
Well,
and
thank you.
I hope people take some time to look at these images and encourage people to look at art. Take some time. It's not an alien thing, and also that your opinion and your idea is important, and your thinking about art is really important.
right. And you don't have to know much.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just have to look at it and say, oh yeah,
Well, and
okay.
your response to art is a natural response.
Yeah.
It's not whether you like or dislike something. It's you have an instinct, a visual instinct. And anyway, thank you for coming on today, Tom.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thanks for
having
joining
me.
us today.
You bet.
And we'll look
Appreciate it.
forward to next week's program. Thank you.